This is Pick, and welcome back to my guide for FTB NeoTech. Today I'd like to make a new base. Well, more like a new facility within my base, I guess. And in order to run a new base, I'm gonna need power for it, right? So let's use a new type of power generation, solar energy. Unlike the broken, lame solar panels from most other mods, the solar panels from Extended Industrialization require an item input to run. Essentially, you're automating your solar panels. One photovoltaic cell lasts 10 minutes. Of course, it only degrades during the daytime, and what's more is that you can fill the solar panel with distilled water, which cuts the degradation rate in half, so a photovoltaic cell will last 20 minutes. Also, as you would expect, solar panels only degrade during the daytime, which is when they run. The amount of energy they make is dependent on the height of the sun in the sky. This is primarily for just to know if it works more than anything, but I'm going to make a repair talisman just to see if it can repair photovoltaic cells. Spoiler alert, it can't. But something a lot of people get stuck on is needing the tall grass. I think in a future update you're supposed to be able to magically get the tall grass EMC knowledge from a quest reward when you make the Empowerer. But for right now, since I can't do that, how about we go find one the old-fashioned way. To get to a savanna village, which is where I'll find tall grass in a loot chest, I want to make a new way of getting there. The Voidshift wand should make travel fairly simple and straightforward. I probably should have made one of these a lot sooner, but oh well. It'll let you zip across the landscape at a pretty fast pace. It took a bit of searching, but eventually I found a tall grass, and of course the first thing you should do is put it in your transmutation table so that you have the memory saved of how to make more. Not that I really need to automate tall grass yet, but we will need a lot at some point in the future. Then you can craft that empowered emeradic crystal and make the repair talisman. In order to use the repair talisman, you're going to require a Klein star with EMC in it. This is different from the original Equivalent Exchange 2 that you might know from Tekkit Classic. However, that was unintended in the first place and it was always supposed to use EMC. To fill a Klein star, you're going to need a relay. As I said before, these things are a little buggy and they don't properly work 100% as intended, but for this purpose they at least are functional. What you want to do is place down a relay next to some collectors. This will fill the relay with EMC. Then you just have to place your Klein star in the right spot and it'll start taking in EMC. It's pretty much a battery. Then take it out, the repair talisman will take EMC out of the Klein star and use it to repair durability on your armor and tools. Now that all the solar stuff is ready, I have moved it over to the building that it's supposed to be powering. Of course, you're going to need to set up a distillery over here, or several if you want, so that you have enough distilled water to fuel all of your solar panels. Fuel is not the right word. Well, you get the point. I've run an item pipe all the way over here as well so that the facility can access all of the items on the main network. The pipe goes underground. If you use the shrinking device, it makes it much easier to manage those types of cables. A handy tool for managing all of your machines at this stage is the Universal Transformer. Such a device is capable of taking in any form of power and outputting any other form of power. To use it, you simply have to place the corresponding tiers of hull inside the GUI. Of course, you're going to need to put the square on the corresponding correct side. If you're just using it to move up one tier though, it's probably not worth it, but it's useful if you want to have an extreme voltage line powering a bunch of low voltage machines or something. I'll do you one better than that Universal Transformer though. Enter the Machine Chainer. This thing is borderline broken. What does it do? Well, in the direction it's pointing, it's now connected to all of the inventories of every machine in its line of sight, as long as they're all connected. If you have a non-machine, it will break the connection. It feeds power to all of them, it will feed items to all of them, and it will feed fluids to all of them. So, if I were to just put on some power, all of the machines are powered. And I've gone ahead and pre-filtered all of them so that they can only accept what they want. So if I were to put some rubber in a hopper, it'll automatically equally distribute it to all of the machines in the chainer's reach. What's more is that you can just hook up an item pipe from your storage network with a blank blacklist and it'll automatically fill all of the slots in all of the machines, as well as take out all of the products from all of the machines. It's extremely good, and the only limitation is really the item pipe that you're connecting to it. I would definitely recommend putting some extra motors on it, or at least only having materials that are produced slowly. It's a super powerful thing to have though. At this stage, I would recommend using it a lot. Now to go over the main purpose of this facility in the first place: oil extraction. You'll need a fair sum of space to place an oil drilling rig. It's quite large, very tall especially. Like the quarries, it uses drills to run. That's a simple matter of putting drills in the input hatch. Now, you could put aluminum drills in it and get virulent mix and process that into crude oil, but I much prefer just skipping straight to stainless steel and getting the shale oil to turn into crude oil. It makes much more useful byproducts. Not that stainless steel is cheap for me, but I also would have much more of that than I do aluminum at current moment. Though I guess with infrastructure, more aluminum wouldn't necessarily be a hard thing to accomplish. To process shale oil, I won't be using the regular distilleries. The distilleries are kind of garbage. Instead, I've reached a point where I can afford a distillation tower. This is a modular multi-block. You can set the size of which you want it to be in the GUI, and it will set the hologram for the structure to be built appropriately. You'll need one layer for every output a given recipe provides. You don't need to put all of the outputs on different layers, but I think it just looks better if you do it like that. If it's not tall enough, I think it just won't produce all of the outputs it should be. But I mean, why would you make it shorter than necessary anyway? You want to get full use out of your products, obviously. I'll be real with you. Managing fluids sucks with petrochemistry. So many pipes have to go to so many places. But you've seen that if you watched my video on petrochemistry. So we're going to simplify things. As you can see, I'm making components for an Applied Energistics ME system. This will require that you of course find a meteor, but if you have Certus quartz you probably already found one, and then you broke the thing in the center to get all of the presses. The presses are handled in the packer instead of the inscriber. The packer is much easier to automate and can be much quicker, so we'll start with that. When adding machines to a line on a filterless machine chainer, you're going to want to turn the pipe off by changing the blacklist to a whitelist. I definitely did not just have a mishap where I placed down an assembler and it just filled it with random junk. Also, something you might not have known about machines is that you can actually automatically filter a recipe by shift-clicking from JEI. You just have to make sure you're on the right page. I definitely didn't just learn that. No, I've been doing it the whole time and not doing everything manually dragging it in, even though there's video evidence of me doing it manually and dragging it in. I don't think it works for multi-blocks though. I also set up an electric blast furnace explicitly for making molten redstone. Machine chainers work on all of the ports of multi-blocks too, by the way. These things are broken and I absolutely love them. As you would expect, they handle fluids much the same as they do items and energy. Now, in order to make use of an ME system, I'm going to require a ton of Restonia crystals. I don't know if this is a bug or not, but you can throw stacks of items down at a time and they'll transform. I was considering automating this, but if it's that easy to just make 9 stacks worth of Restonia crystals, I guess it's not worth it just yet. Should the need arise, I'll automate it properly though. Let's also make and automate some Fluix crystals while we're here. Naturally, you make charged Certus quartz in the polarizer, and we already have redstone and I can just compress some nether quartz dust into nether quartz. Or well, I guess technically not nether quartz, but you get the point. To make the ME controller, I'll require some sky steel. To make that, throw all of the ingredients into a pool of lava. You shouldn't need too much, but I would make at least half a stack for the time being. You only actually need the ME controller to get your network up and running, but I'll craft an energy acceptor for the quest anyway. This is what you would use if you wanted to have your base power your crystal growth accelerators, instead of just using a crystal resonance generator like I did. I'm only doing it for the quest though. The focus here is on the ME controller. I'll give you the really fast rundown of how Applied Energistics works. The controller has a specified number of channels that can come out of each face of it. In normal packs it's 32, in this pack it's 64. Dense cables carry 64 channels within them, regular cables carry 16, double the usual 8. Dyed cables of different colors won't connect, but if they're the same color or connected to Fluix cable, they will and share channels. Each device you have on a system consumes one channel. Devices include import buses, export buses, interfaces, storage buses, pattern providers, and a few other things. Notably, in this version of Applied Energistics, level emitters do not consume a channel, making redstone control of your ME network much easier. I'll primarily be working with import buses, export buses, and storage buses, with a few of the other components scattered about. Something to note is that all cable-style components from Applied Energistics, that means Fluix cables, covered cables, smart cables, dense cables, etc., can all be produced via EMC. Should you not want to automate these things, you don't have to. I will probably just be taking stacks of them out of my transmutation tablet whenever I need them. It especially helps when we don't have access to auto-crafting yet. We'll get there at some point. There are a few other crafting components you'll probably want to automate. I wouldn't recommend getting anywhere near the upper limit of the chainer's length, as your pipe transfer limit is going to start throttling you if you aren't careful. To fix this, you can always put some motors in the pipes though. That will increase their extraction rate. Note that it doesn't affect the insertion rate. You'll need to up the extraction rate on the source of the material in question for anything else, like any other automated machine. While MI does have these really large multi-block fluid tanks that store a pretty large amount of fluids, I'd much rather just use a bunch of ME drives and store everything digitally. Why store fluids in a bunch of individual multi-blocks, where you're using like 125 blocks of space just to store one fluid, when I can use 1/10 of a block space to store one type of fluid, and more fluid at that. I mean, I guess the multi-blocks look better, but that's beside the point. ME drives take up one channel on your network, they can hold up to 10 different drives in them, and I can give each of them a different fluid to store. 16K is probably overkill, but I can afford it, so why not? In reality, 4Ks are probably more than enough for each fluid. By default, they don't actually store only one fluid, they'll store many different types of fluid as long as you have enough storage bytes. In this case though, I'm going to be using the cell workbench to partition each drive so that they can only store one type of fluid each. This makes things much simpler and neater. Though we will be making like 40 different fluids today, so I guess it's gonna be a lot. You've been warned. It's funny though, if I had went with 1Ks, I would have gotten 9 times as far with my materials. But I made my choice. You could also use variable sizes for things that you might need in different quantities. To import, simply place an import bus on a given fluid inventory. Imports import into the system, exports export from the system. So you'll want to export, say, oil, and import its byproducts. Note that to export, the fluid or item in question has to be stored inside the system already. What I mean by that is it won't just send from an import bus to an export bus. It has to be capable of being stored inside the system. But that's why we're buffering everything in the ME drive. The default speed of import and export buses is a little bit slow. To combat this, you might want to invest in some acceleration cards. The basic and advanced upgrade cards from Applied Energistics also have an EMC value, so expanding your network is a fairly simple task. Once you make your cards, put them into the slots on the side of the GUI of the bus or whatever you have in question. It will greatly accelerate the rate at which the device operates. I should also mention that I made an infinite water cell. Does exactly what it says. It provides your ME network with infinite water without having to pump it or anything. I'll also want an entire separate network of fluids from the other half of the base. So I'll be producing a whole bunch of hydrogen, oxygen, and all those other fancy fluids, and storing them in cells. And basically everybody knows this already, but you can view, manipulate, and access all of your items and fluids on a network from a terminal. I would recommend going straight for a crafting terminal at this stage of the game. It functions more or less the same as the one from Integrated Dynamics, except it can only look at things on your ME network. In the event of fluids, it will take out or put in a bucket as long as there is a bucket stored within the system somewhere. Now we just have one type of cable spaghetti instead of a whole host of them. Let's do a little demo. I've put down some chemical reactors and now we can craft some chemical components with them. Of course, they need power, so power will go in from the back. And I'll put in some recipes to process my sulfuric crude oil and sulfuric naphtha. These take those components I just said, combine them with hydrogen, and produce a clean version with some sulfuric acid as a byproduct. I also get to show off that whole shift clicking thing I was talking about before. In regards to your export buses, you'll have to whitelist what you want to have exported, but import buses don't need a whitelist, so they can just take in everything. Though you could whitelist them if you only want certain components being imported into the system. Do what fits your use case. Okay, first let's make a basic small distillation tower. This one's going to crack oil. It's going to turn it into sulfuric light fuel, sulfuric heavy fuel, and more sulfuric naphtha. The output products are going to get directly imported into the system. Now I can hydrogenate the sulfuric light fuel and heavy fuel into, well, light fuel and heavy fuel. These two products can then be mixed into diesel. Finally, something we can use. And use it we shall. Diesel goes in, you guessed it, the diesel generator. It can also be used as a liquid fuel in a boiler, but I don't feel like setting that up right now. I believe it is more efficient in a boiler, but for right now we want to make sure the system has enough power to keep running in the first place. Time to make the massive distillation tower. This one is 8 tall. Well, I guess that doesn't include the blocks on the bottom, but it's an 8 size distillation tower, or size 8, whatever. This one will take steam cracked naphtha, so you'll need to make some steam. The easiest way to do that is to just use one of those single block boilers and fill it with fuel and water. I'll be manually feeding it fuel for now, but that's only because we don't have any fuel hooked up to the network, or any items. Again, I'll get to it later. The outputs for processing steam cracked naphtha in the distillation tower are as follows: methane, acetylene, ethylene, propene, butadiene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and benzene. Lots of double bonded hydrocarbons, and one single bonded to round it off. I'll be going over each of their uses as I start processing them. Now that we've discussed both machine chainers and applied energistics, let's combine the two together. If you recall, I demonstrated using the chainer first with a hopper. Well, I guess first was energy, but beside the point. By hooking up the export bus with all of the various things I need, I can handle all of the fluid logistics from here. Of course, I'll also want to put an import bus on the same chainer, and give both some acceleration cards. This will handle a whole line of petrochemical processing recipes. The first step is to combine propene and oxygen to make acrylic acid. You don't have to worry about the excess water output here, it works fine with the way I have my system. I believe it's the infinity cell that's just allowing voiding of the water. Acrylic acid then gets combined with ethanol to make diethyl ether. Ethanol is produced from ethylene. Note that this is an entirely separate ethylene producing process relative to the one I was making with potatoes. Combining diethyl ether with diesel makes boosted diesel. This has twice the energy density of regular diesel, so the fuel lasts twice as long. Effectively, you're getting more bang for your buck from your oil processing, and acrylic acid isn't really used for much else, unless you really want to make slime balls or something. Since I don't have a single button blacklist or whitelist to disable a machine chainer, I'll have to work with the export bus instead. By putting a redstone card in and providing a redstone signal, and having the correct redstone setting, I can disable the export bus from working, and that will allow me to put more machines on the network without worrying of things going in the wrong slots. Now that I have applied energistics set up, I don't really have a need to use integrated dynamics anymore. So I'm going to hook up some cables and bring it all the way over to the basement where I have my main storage room. One regular cable worth of channels should be plenty for the time being. Should I want to automate the rest of the facility rather than use all of my modern industrialization pipes, I'll have to bring some dense cables over. We'll get there when we get there though. I believe there is a way to hook up a storage bus to an item interface or something to connect your integrated dynamics and applied energistics systems. But I couldn't get it to work, and it's probably for the best anyway, as that sounds like a recipe for lag. Instead, I've just set up another storage controller, connected to all of those sophisticated storage chests. They make for a nice dump chest area. Then I can hook up more storage buses to the various drawers and other inventories, and I have a way of accessing all of these items from Applied Energistics. Integrated Dynamics is kinda laggy anyway if you make a bigger system than what I have. With a crafting terminal, that means I have item access in both buildings. I might get into a wireless crafting terminal at a later episode, but for right now I don't need one. I should probably set up a stainless steel quarry as well. I'll be needing the materials from it very soon. Much like the oil, I'm just going to condense them with a condenser and some energy collectors. Eventually I might unify all of my drills into one area, but for the time being I guess I'll have this one separate. Stainless steel drills can pick up platinum, tungsten, titanium, osmium, and monazite ore. Many of these ores will require crushing, but beyond that, a bunch of them have different steps. The simplest of these would be the monazite. You can centrifuge that to get yttrium, neodymium, and cadmium dusts. All of the other ones have some form of complexity to them though. Because we started with the processing of crude oil to make diesel, and I guess boosted diesel, I already have a good stockpile of sulfuric acid. This is what's used to process raw platinum. This makes platinum sulfuric solution, which must then be purified into, well, purified platinum solution. The purified solution then gets electrolyzed. This makes tiny platinum dust, as well as a small chance of getting tiny iridium dust. You then, of course, recycle the sulfuric acid. I think you can see why it's much easier to do all of this with Applied Energistics. Also, props to the machine chainer for making this take so many less channels than it would have otherwise. As you would expect, I've hooked up everything to the storage network. Making sure that the ME system can directly access everything is essential. You'll also probably want a void upgrade on these things. That way, when it fills up, it won't fill all of the generic chests on your network. The next thing I'd like to set up is Tungsten Processing. This one is painful if it catches you off guard, but I already know how to handle it. You see, the thing about Tungsten Processing is that it takes 2 minutes for one compressor to turn one tungsten tiny dust into one tungsten nugget. This is obviously painfully slow. To combat this, I'm going to use 6 compressors instead of 1. I can also always add time torches if I want to make it even quicker. I won't be processing tungsten like this forever, but I will be to get all of my initial tungsten, as the supply of tungsten ore itself isn't really a concern at this stage. Okay, back to the chemicals. Styrene is produced with iron dust, steam, and ethylbenzene in a chemical reactor. You then combine styrene and butadiene to make styrene-butadiene. I've hooked the chromium dust up to the network, so now tiny chromium dust should be coming in and making Styrene-Butadiene Rubber. It's the same thing as the polyethylene, really. Styrene-Butadiene is versatile and useful. Instead of using rubber sheets directly to produce your cabling, you can just use the liquid form and it will make the cables from that, and wire obviously. Of course, you can also process this directly into a stack of rubber sheets at a time in the vacuum freezer. So if you need a large surplus of rubber and don't feel like using EMC or other methods to get it, there you go. Now to start making a bunch of multi-blocks. I'm going to make a whole row of vacuum freezers. The trick here is that most recipes in the vacuum freezer and the electric blast furnace only require 3 ports. A port for energy, an item input, and an item output. If you have a recipe that you want on that line but requires an extra port, you'll have to use one of the freezers on the end of the line. Now, I don't quite follow that here just because I don't want to organize things in that fashion, but I can always rearrange things if I need. In any case, I'm going to be getting liquid air from this vacuum freezer. You just have to put an air intake in an item input slot. It doesn't get consumed, don't worry. It'll, I guess, take air in from the environment, quote-unquote, and give you liquid air as a result. Send that into a centrifuge, and you'll get nitrogen, oxygen, and argon. You're going to want a ton of argon, believe me. Very useful. While I'm not going to get around to fixing all of the ugly cabling today, I'm still going to make some cable anchors. These are used for cable facades. You can put 4 cable anchors around any block and it will make 4 facades out of that block's texture. This lets you cover up any sides of a block face you don't want to see a cable in. Makes for a lot neater of a base, or at least neater looking. Of course it also has solid collision so you can stand on it. Now I can start automating production of hot ingots, and freezing them into, I guess, room temperature ingots. Not really much to say here other than I have a line of vacuum freezers ready to go, and I'll also be preparing a line of electric blast furnaces. By having machines share walls, it will make for a lot less of space and material cost. Just remember that machines cannot share ports, hence why you can only use 3 ports at a time. I guess I never tested if you can put one on the bottom, but Canthal will be first because I need that to make more blast furnaces anyway. I'm making a separate power network explicitly for the ME controllers. Emphasis on the S there, I'm making a bunch more. Controllers can connect in a sort of multi-block as long as they're not touching more than 3 adjacent controllers. Usually the optimal design is a big box. I don't think I'm going to need more than 8 though, probably. I might go for the full box, a small one though. That double channel limit helps a ton. In any case, I've set up both solar for this as well as more diesel generators. I needed more power in this part of the base anyway. Diesel is what's going to hold me off until I get to nuclear. After a fair sum of work, I finally have some platinum ingots. The end goal for today is to make our first processing unit. As you can see, we still have a bunch of steps to go, so let's keep moving. Methane's only use is to be turned into more acetylene, so let's get that hooked up. As opposed to the vacuum freezers, I'm going to put the blast furnaces in the center of its hallway. This just makes it so much easier to manage the ports. Vinyl chloride is made from acetylene and hydrochloric acid. Much like the other chemicals, I'm going to be producing this on site here instead of using it from over in the other building. It just makes it so much easier to get. Of course, you'll want to make sure you're making everything at a fast enough rate. After that, once again, tiny chromium dust turns vinyl chloride into polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. This is just to really go over the checklist of everything. Obviously, at this point you should be able to set these things up yourself, and infer that I've done all of it off camera. I'm just gonna push to the end now. We're very close to processing units, but of course we still have some steps to go. First up is Monocrystalline Silicon. This is made with iridium tiny dust, along with a bunch of silicon dust and some argon in the electric blast furnace. So, because this recipe requires more ports than usual, it's gonna have to go in one of the blast furnaces on the end of the line. You can then take that into a cutting machine and cut it into silicon wafers, at a pretty good return rate. Given the low amount of iridium you're getting right now though, you're not going to be able to make too many. But I guess you don't need a whole ton of processing units at the moment either. Combining all of the junk you see on screen, I can make some RAM now. Or I guess as the game calls it, random access memory. Well, that's what RAM stands for, but that's beside the point. It was a decently lengthy trip to get to this point, but we only have one more major component left to make. I guess it has a bunch of sub-components though. Here's just a preview of that Styrene-Butadiene Rubber cable crafting at work. Eventually I'll move everything to this recipe, but for now we'll just go with annealed copper, platinum, and aluminum. Annealed copper and platinum are both of the tier 4 energy transmitters. You definitely want to shore up your annealed copper production by this point. At this point we have most of this junk already, so let's get on making some processing unit boards. It's a good thing I left all that space open in the back, because I was allowed to make an input for the PVC. I could have changed all of the logistics on the chainers to be with applied energistic stuff, but I'd rather just keep the pipes, they work. But yeah, with that we're almost done. The last raw materials that we don't have automated for this are, surprisingly enough, diamonds and emeralds. Obviously I could just use a condenser if I wanted, but I'll be doing it in a more fancy manner next episode. I'm going to brute force it for the time being just to get this processing unit done. If you're running an ethical trade facility with villagers, you probably will have a whole ton of emeralds to work with. I think I will go with that, just to separate this from the diamond automation I'll be doing with the implosion compressor. Otherwise, you'd also use the implosion compressor to make emeralds. But I pretty much have everything I need now, at least. And there you have it. One processing unit. These things are super expensive, by the way. That's 4 digital circuits per, 16 electronic circuits per, and a whole stack of analog circuits, sequentially. This facility was meant for circuit automation and petrochemistry. So, with that, I guess we're done for today. A lot of progression. I managed to break down that entire petrochemical process. We didn't use quite everything. I haven't gone through toluene yet. Also, I guess I didn't use benzene. You'd make ethylbenzene from benzene and ethylene. But I'm going to call it there for today. So, thank you for watching. Tip documents in the description as usual. If you have any questions, feel free to leave one in the comments. And this has been Pick. I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.